Hey guys, Shane here. So it's been a while since we've done any video regarding painting figures, and I thought we'd get right back into it. I have been recently introduced to the old and classically and very helpful painting videos from the legendary Bob Ross, which is an American artist who did painting tutorials in the 1970s or 80s, I believe, judging by the style. And it kind of inspired me to do another painting video. Just for simple fact being is it kind of got me thinking about painting again, and he kind of inspired me once again. So even though he's long since gone from us, he's still a good inspiration for painting. So I'll put a link to Bob Ross's YouTube videos, even though the man passed away a good about 20 or 30 years ago, I believe. So with that in mind, I thought we'd do a figure painting video, and we will be looking at painting one of Dragon's 1/35th scale Panzer Grenadier troops from their Kharkov set. So they're all wearing their distinctive winter parkas, and also I've replaced the head with a resin aftermarket head, just to add a bit more detail. I've already painted the face and the exposed hand using the similar method I use for all my flesh painting. So a link to that video will pop up right now, and if you haven't seen any of my painting videos before, or you're just new to the channel, I would strongly recommend that you pick or you click on that link, have a look on the face painting tutorial, and then come back and we shall take it from there. So the most prominent part of this chap's uniform is his parka jacket, which has a very unique kind of reedy green colour depending on what reference photos you look at. So in order to replicate this, I'm going to take some German, or should I say some Vallejo Model Air RLM2 or light grey green, which is reference number 71.044. So it's a very kind of reedy green colour, and that's going to be the major colour for his parka. So instead of just airbrushing it on, I'm going to take my paintbrush, and first things first, I'm just going to place a layer of the light grey green on its own first. And I'm not going to tin my paint too much, for it is already a pre-tinned paint because it's designed for airbrushing. So it's also quite handy for figure painters like us, as we don't have to tin our paints all too much. So I'm just going to start working this in. I'm going to have to apply a couple of thin layers just to build this up, because it is a very opaque paint. As you can see, the grey surface primer that I primed this model in is already showing through. So several layers will be needed. So with a couple of coats of grey-green, I'll let it dry. Now I'm going to start working up the base colours for the grey. So I'm going to give these trousers a winter grey camo scheme. White can often be a difficult colour to paint, however it's not that difficult once we take the steps to build up the shades to give us a very full and rich colour. So my base coat is going to be Vallejo Neutral Grey, which I'm going to apply in several tin coats. I'm going to mix a little bit of water into my paint, not a lot, basically just a drop, just to give me a little bit of flow in the water. So here's my neutral grey. I'm just going to mix a little bit of water. I just dip the tip of my brush into some water, and I'm just mixing in whatever moisture is in my brush, and there we have it. Nice and simple as that. I'm just going to remove the excess paint from my brush because I don't want to overfill my brush. So now we're going to start building up our layers. So this will probably take at least 2 layers of grey to get right, but again, just take your time and gradually build it up. Now to do this white effect, we're actually going to be painting in the grey scale, so we're going to go from white, or from neutral grey to a very light grey, and that's how we're going to achieve our winter kind of white finish, if you will. I can be a little bit messy with this because I haven't painted in his snow boots yet, so I don't have to worry about overspray, if you will, or getting the paint where I don't want it. Though I will take care not to get any paint on his parka jacket. And I'm basically going just to continue this on all the areas I want to be grey. We'll also be doing a similar, yet different application for a whitewash on his helmet that we'll get to in a few moments. So with the grey laid down, now I'm going to start applying our base colours for the fur of his hood. And for that we're going to use Vallejo Model Air Green Brown. And this is a reedy kind of brownish colour, which is actually quite close to the fur I've seen in reproductions and in surviving originals. And this is a very watered down paint, as all Model Air colours are. They're actually quite good for brush painting for this reason, though they do require to be applied in several thin layers. But if you take your time, you can get some very nice paint finishes with them. Okay, so with the base for our fur laid, now we're going to start applying some field grey to both the helmet and to his tunic that is just about visible in his collar. So for this I'm using Vallejo Game Colour Field Grey, once again mixed with a small amount of water, and I'm just going to start painting in his helmet. Again, this paint is somewhat thin, so it will take a layer or two, but that's not a problem. And I'm just going to build it up. Again, it can look a bit messy. As long as we just build up a few even coats, the paint in the end will be a very even and smooth finish, and it will not be a problem. So again, the most important thing about basing or blocking in colours is just making sure we get the main colours down and get them down as evenly or neatly as possible. And that can take a little bit of time, but again, be patient with yourselves. Don't be putting any unnecessary pressure on you, because it will just make that you'll rush your model and you will not get a nice result. So there's a helmet kind of blocked in. It's a little bit hard because the camera, the way it's positioned under my nose, I'll have to come back in off camera and tidy this up. But basically what I'll do is I'll let this dry a little bit, and then I'll apply another coat or two. So when we're letting that dry, I'm going to switch brush to a long bristle detail brush or liner brush from the Winsor and Newton Cotman range. Very good series of brushes. And now I'm going to paint in his collar, which you can see I've left in the grey primer. And I'm just going to be careful not to paint in the flesh areas that we've already painted in for this tutorial. And if you're curious to how I paint flesh, I have a tutorial up already, which should pop up in one of the cards or link annotations on your top right of your screen. And give that a check out and see, is it any help to you? So there's the field grey laid into the model. I'm going to apply a coat or two of this, again keeping our paint nice and thin, and I'm just going to build that up nice and gradually. And I do not know why this will not focus, but whatever. So now I'm going to start putting in the blocking colours for the leather, for both his snow boots, his belt, the leather for his holster, and then I'm going to give a red leather for his map case. And also the last part I'm going to block in before we start adding our highlights is his binoculars. Also of note, I've also used a bit of neutral grey to block in his gloves. So for the base of the darker leather, I'm going to use some Vallejo Model Colour German Grey, and I'm just going to apply this into his boots and to his belt and to his, I think that's a Luger P08 holster that you can't really see, just tucked in behind the arm holding the gloves. Once again, I am not scared to be a little bit messy and sloppy applying the base colour as I've tinned my paint. which will make this part a little bit easier to deal with. So for his map case, I want more of like a red-brown. So for that, we're going to mix a small amount of Vallejo model color flat brown, mix a bit of water, and this is going to give us our base coat that we're going to work up into a leather effect. So now we're going to paint in his field glasses, and for this we're going to use Vallejo So now we're going to paint in his field glasses, and for that we're going to use Vallejo model color Middlestone, which is a very warm mustard kind of dark yellow, which does really give you a nice striking effect and quite close to the shade that a lot of German mid and late war equipment was painted in, or at least what it looks like after it's been faded in the sun for 20 years, but ah well. And for the dust cover, for the eye lenses, I'm going to apply some German grey, because I believe this item was rubber in real life. I'm just going to paint that in there, nice and quick. And then the last thing I'm going to do before we lay our shade washes is I'm just going to block in the belt buckle. And for this I just made up my own concoction of gunmetal, which is in this case Vallejo's Model Air Silver mixed, or should I say Model Air Steel mixed with a small amount of flat black, just to tone it down, as it is a very intense colour and I don't want to overdo it. And I'm just going to work it in like so with a fine brush. I don't want too much on my brush, so I don't want to swamp the model. Again, there we go. So there we have his belt buckle that you can barely see, but it has been painted in. So with all our touch-ups out of the way and allowed to dry, now it's time to start adding our shade. And as always, I like to use washes to achieve this. Just simply it's more efficient, and often economy of time is quite important to many of us, including myself. So for that I'm going to use some Citadel Agrax Earthshade. I've shaken the bottle very well, or shook the bottle very well, and I'm just going to apply it rather heavily, but trying to keep it as even as I can. So it is important to ensure that it doesn't pool too heavily in spots, or it will be very difficult to recover. You'll actually almost have to strip the model and start again. So it's the only thing when working with acrylic washes. I have done with oils, but oils can take a long time to set. So our wash has been laid. I've kept it very smooth on the uniform and any place where there's fabric. I intentionally blotched it in certain places onto his helmet just to kind of make it look a bit dirty. We will be whitewashing this helmet anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm going to show the different types of effects you can achieve with different colours of wash. So his binoculars are noticeably a different colour to the rest of his uniform. So I'm actually going to switch out my colour and use a sepia. In this case it's Serpium Sepia, again from Citadel. If I can find it, a dark sepia colour. And I'm just going to apply some of this onto his field glasses, and you will see that it will just give us a very different hue and intensity to this, and it just helps draw attention to it as well. So there we go. Again, you can apply this light or heavy, it's up to yourself. Just keep it smooth and make sure it doesn't pull. And there we go. So you can see immediately that the binoculars have popped now, and also the ridges of the binoculars have popped. So now what we're going to do is we're going to allow this to dry fully. Again, before we let it dry or walk away from it, we'll inspect the model very quickly, do a 360 of it, make sure there's no pools of wash, because once it dries you're stuck with it, and you either have to paint over it and start again, or somehow try to blend it in with subsequent layers of paint. But either way, you can't just wipe it away like it was in oil. That's the only downside of this. But there doesn't appear to be any pooling, and it's already beginning to dry because it's quite humid here. So I'm going to allow this to dry fully, and then we're going to start adding our highlights. Welcome back. So I've allowed the wash to dry for a good solid 24 hours and hasn't pooled anywhere, which is good. So now we're going to get to the fun part. We're going to start actually building up our highlight, and this is when our model really comes to life. So we're going to begin for highlights for his parka jacket, which is going to be the most dominant part. So I'm going to take our original RLM2 colour, or light grey green from Model Air that we used earlier, and then I'm going to take some green brown from Model Air and mix a small amount of it in, like a reedy green highlight colour, which I'll show you what it'll look like in a minute. And once again, I'm just going to do this by eye. So the colour I'm going for is something like this. I'm just mixing a bit of the reed green in. I don't want this to be an overtly bright colour, and it doesn't need to be too heavy either, because I want it to be somewhat opaque, which is the nice thing about this type of paint. There's a slight transparency to it. So often I get a lot of questions from people, and they're asking me, where do you start highlighting? Well, the rule simply is wherever the light will hit the most. So if you see like the light reflecting off your figure, well, that's where you're going to hit it with colour. So basically anywhere that's the top of creases or where the material is taut, and that's where you'll hit it. So we'll start on the hood here first, so you can see it in action. Now it's subtle, which is good. We don't need this to be too stark yet, and it might take a layer or two to build up. So I'm really just hitting this colour to the very uppermost reaches of his hood. And leaving the washed green in the recesses as our highlight, or should I say as our shadow. Again, like here, I'm just picking out kind of the middle raised parts and leaving areas I feel would not receive the same amount of light in the shadow colour that we've already put in due to our wash. Especially places like his shoulders are actually going to catch the most light as well. It can also be very handy to highlight details, so by tracing pocket seams, for example, we can help give a sense of definition to our model, which is very important. It just helps break things up somewhat. Just like I'm going to do here, I'm just going to trace his collar here, leaving some of it in the darker colour, and you can see how it immediately pops, even though this colour isn't as intense, as I've intentionally not overexposed this, because I can build it up gradually and make it brighter if I wish, but it's much harder to go back if you don't like it, especially at this stage. So it's better just to slowly build it up, where you have ultimate control of what you're doing. So we're going to focus in our brighter colour, especially on his shoulders and the tops of creases.
Now, because this colour is very thin, it will take a coat or two to get a proper coverage, but that's not a problem. When we're letting that dry in one place, we can be working on another. So I'm just going to pick out these creases. This area here, because it's reflecting the light back at me. So naturally, this is where natural occurring highlight will occur, and therefore that's exactly where we put our lighter colour. It's as simple as that. Just using the lighter colour to kind of trace it out somewhat, just so we're aware there's a pocket there. Same with the little pull cord on his hood. And there we go. And the only thing I'm trying to avoid is any messy brush strokes. I want everything to look like it's there on purpose, because that is really the key. So if you commit to something, see it through. You can often tell someone when they try something and then they kind of panic and they stop painting. Rule of thumb is try not to do that if possible. Just see it through. You never know how it's going to end, and you can always use washes later on or glazes to tone things back if you don't like it, and just kind of build up again from there. The worst thing is just when people put down a big wallop of colour and then they'll panic and then they don't know what to do with it and they just leave it. So continue. If you're not sure, just see it through to the end. After all, we're always learning, and this is how we learn. All our eyes see the world slightly different, and that is the joy of what we do. Even though we're painting in historical context and we know a lot of the colours of the equipment, we can still put our own slight spin on things just to give things a little bit of personality, as equipment and material weathers in different ways in relation to the environment it's in. So that gives us a little bit of freedom and space. Not a lot, but just enough to allow us to explore different techniques and methods. Okay, now I'll come down here to where the seam of the buttons are. And again, I'm just tracing. I'm picking out raised details, and I'm picking out the very tops of them. Just, once again, to help the viewer see that that detail is there. And because this paint, as it's designed for airbrushing, is very thin, it does take paintbrushing very well. However, it is very light. Now, I haven't tinned this anyway, this is straight out of the bottle, but still so light that it requires a couple of seconds to partially dry in between coats. So again, we've got some nice creases here. Now, a little bit too much paint on my brush, so I'm just going to wipe off my brush on my thumb and blend this mass of paint until it's seamless. And there we go. By just cleaning our brush, we can fix any pooling of paint we don't want or any excess of paint we don't want. It's that simple. And we're just following these seams, these ridge lines, and we're leaving these valleys or creases, if you will, in utter shade, basically in the colour that we created from the wash. It looks a bit messy, but that's fine. I can blend this all back in because the paint is so thin that once it's worked into the fabric of the model, if you will, it basically takes away the starkness, and you get us a nice, almost micro texture, which I find is good for fabric because it helps the eye imagine that there's a texture from the textile of the fabric. Now I'm going to start highlighting the bottom, and again I'm just going to follow these ridge lines and I'm just going to blend out, just pulling my brush in one direction at a time so I don't get any nasty brush strokes, and then I'll let that dry for a couple of seconds before I come back to it. I'll pick another ridge line here again, and I'm just following where the raised ground is basically, and I'm leaving everything else in our washed shade colour. Well, that took a bit longer than I thought, but we have our first highlights on our parka jacket, and I'm quite happy with it. It actually looks quite close to the real thing, which I'm quite happy about. We might add a smaller highlight to certain parts just to make certain things pop, but for now we're going to swing now to highlighting the winter trousers. And just like with the parka jacket, we're going to come as we're highlighting the tops of the creases and any of the top material in exactly the same way. And we're just going to come back with the grey. We won't be doing any mixtures as yet. It's going to come straight in and you'll get a really nice star effect. And it is exactly the same way as we did. I'm going to blend that in a little bit because I went in a little bit too thick and I feel that's just a little bit too jarring. And I'm going back in with the neutral grey and just keep working that into the tops of the creases and any area I feel catches the most light. And again, I'm just trying to be clever, trying to be clean and consistent.
So with the grey for the trousers highlighted in, now I'm going to start highlighting the gloves, and for that I'm going to switch to one of my long bristle brushes. And again, I'm going to use some neutral grey to do this. I'm just going to pick out any of the raised details. And there we have the basic form of the glove picked out. It doesn't need to be overly highlighted for this. You know, these are woolen gloves, they're quite dark as it is, and it contrasts nicely against the green either way, so that's more than adequate. So now we're going to start highlighting the darker grey areas, such as the boot and belt and his pistol holster. And for that I'm going to use Vallejo model colour German black brown. I'm going to focus on areas I want to make stand out. Now often the boots will get scratched just from the nature of acrylics, so you might have to do a bit of touch up. So like the boots were pretty basically done, but enough just to add a little bit of visual interest. And because it's a dark colour on a dark colour anyway, you're not going to see. Now I'm going to come back with a bit of ochre in places just to show some very worn leather effects, especially on the holster. Again, it's going to be exactly the same on the other boot. Again, so I'll pick out little bits that I want just to add a little bit of visual interest to. Now for the belt, I'm actually just going to focus to the kind of centre parts of the belt. So I'll make sure you guys can see. You can. So I'm actually going to just focus really to the centre of the belt. Like so, and then I'm going to clean my brush. And then I'm going to blend out. There we have a very basic highlight on, again, by painting into the centre of the leather as well, you can achieve this as well. Same on the Luger holster, or the Walter. So I can't remember what type of holster I put into this so long ago. And that's going to catch the edges of it. And there's our belt, very basically highlighted, but more than adequate for the job. Now we're going to work on the mat case. So for the highlight I'm going to use is Vallejo model colour red leather, which is, as the name might suggest, a red leather colour. It's very vibrant, it's a beautiful colour. I had this colour for a long time. I really need to buy a new one because it's starting to go a little bit solid. So for that I'm going to have to mix a little bit of water. So I'm going to really apply just the red leather onto the leading edges of the case. If I have too much on my brush, I'm going to clean my brush and then just blend whatever paint is actually just on the surface I'm working on. And that way then it's very easy to correct any mistakes you feel you've made. Again, catching the edges, doing kind of a form of edge highlight, if you will. And you can see it immediately pops it out. And I'm just doing very light strokes with this paint because I've somewhat thinned it down. So the darker colour is showing through the entire time, and you have very slight streaks of this lighter colour, and that's kind of how leather weathers anyway. So you get a very simple and effective leather effect, like so. Now moving on to the binos, we're going to
go back to our middle stone, and I'm just going to really pick out any of the raised details. So I'm going to make sure I have a good handle on my model, and just picking out some of the areas I want to pop. And it's the little things like this that just give our model, our little figure here, a little burst of energy and life. So you can see how like immediately the binos have just popped out, and that's exactly what we want. So I noticed there's a small little nick on the rubber of the... So now I'm going to move on to the part I've been looking forward to the most, which is going to add the whitewashed effect to his helmet. So I've taken a little bit of sky grey from Vallejo, and I left it on my palette for a few minutes. It's kind of gotten somewhat dry. So I'll leave it for about 10 minutes. And what I'm going to do now is, I'm going to do something kind of akin to a dry brush, but not more, but it's going to be more of a stipple action. So I'm going to fill up a brush, like so. It's an old brush, you can see how the bristles are a bit haggard. And I'm going to take away some of the excess, and I'm going to start stippling it onto his helmet. Very roughly. I want this to have a texture. I want this to make it look like that he painted this on himself. And it'd be nice if you guys could see. And I'm going to leave gaps in areas. I'm going to leave it wear away in places. I'm going to be careful not to get it where I don't want it. I don't want it on his uniform or on his face. And there we have the whitewash effect on his helmet. As simple as that. So we're going to add our final highlight to this, and that's going to be some more sky grey applied to the raised details of his snow pants, or trousers should I say. So I've thinned my paint down, and I'm just going to start working this colour gradually onto the raised detail. It's quite a stark colour, so be careful with it. Don't put on too much too soon, and try to keep the original darker grey in as much place as you can. So now that our trousers have been highlighted, I don't want to go too stark. I kind of like them being a bit faded and worn. After all, this is a fighting uniform, so they are not going to be pristine. So now we're going to add a little bit of weathering, just to give a sense where the soldier's been. And we're going to go for a little bit simple. So I'm just going to add a little bit of simple pigment to add a bit of dirt to the uniform in certain places. And for that, I am just going to use some AK Interactive Darker pigment. I'm going to take a dry brush, and I'm just going to apply it straight onto the model, because once you seal it, it will lock the pigment in place. Now I don't want too much pigment on my brush, just a small amount, and I'm using, again, a kind of haggard bristle brush. That'll give us a little bit of a random effect. So we're going to focus on his boots again, just working this up very slowly. Don't need too much. This can get a bit messy, so be careful that you don't put on too much, because you can overwhelm your work very quickly. However, because we're using this on like a dry method, and we're not applying any fixer, I can literally rub off parts I don't like, or if I want to bring the leather out again, I can just rub it off with my finger. However, I'm also applying this to the base of his trousers. Also, you could do this to his knees as well, to simulate that he's been kneeling down, which, as an infantryman, most certainly he has been, taking cover and scanning his arcs, as it were. So again, just building this up slowly but surely, nice and simple. And it just helps just add a little bit of life to our models. We don't want them to be too plain. At the end of the day, it helps just bring these out. And also, just for a little bit of detail, I'm also going to apply a tiny amount of pigment to his helmet. Again, from explosions, a lot of dirt will be kicked up, and I'm just going to work a little bit of it in, just to dirty that up and give it a bit of character. I like my soldiers that actually look like they've been in battle. They've been engaged for a couple of weeks or a couple of days of fighting, and it does give us some very characterful models. Again, just going to apply a little bit here to the base of his parka. Not a lot, but just a little. And little spots. And it just breaks up the colour ever so slightly. And there we go. And there we have a very simple and effective way to model German
Panzer Grenadiers in winter parka equipment. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please comment, rate and subscribe, and stay tuned for more tutorials. The next one we'll be doing will be a German Fallschirmjäger from the casino area of operation, so that'll be coming up in the very near future, as well as the final part of my Irish Guards Firefly build. So thanks for watching guys, stay safe, happy modelling, and watch out for those buses.